Hello, and welcome to Building SaaS with Python and Django. I am your streamer. I'm Matt Lehman, and I'm a Python software engineer. I've been doing Python for better part of a decade. So what is this stream? This is a stream all about building software as a service, which is what SaaS stands for, which is an online website that offers kind of member services for things. And I'll get into the details of what the specific SaaS is in a moment. But the intention of the stream is to teach people about doing Python development and Django specifically. It's also an opportunity for me to make some headway on my side project. So it's serving two purposes, but the primary purpose is for teaching people a bit more about Python. Let's take a moment to look at what the SaaS is. This is College Conductor. It is a SaaS that I've been building on the side for a while for my wife, who is an independent educational consultant. It's targeted at people in college admissions, and the idea is to help students manage college deadlines and manage their application process here in the US, because there are lots of dates that swim around that process. The specifics of College Conductor are not very important for the stream. They are the domain in which we work. So the terminology that I will use when we look at our database tables and models will be things like schools and deadlines. But I don't expect anybody watching the stream to have any deep knowledge about college admissions. It's not super necessary to understand what's going on. I will explain bits about the domain along the way as they are needed for the discussion. I want to encourage you, if you're new, to chat and ask me questions. Like I said, this is about learning. So if there's something you don't understand, I'm happy to take a detour and explain away. Let's look at, I guess before that, so if you do find this useful in the future, feel free to subscribe on Twitch or follow me on Twitter. I have the same username there of MBLehman, and you can follow me and we can chat about future topics, or that's where I post about new streams coming out and that sort of stuff, so you can keep up with me there. So let's dive into the subject of today's stream, shall we? All the code for College Conductor is available on GitHub. It's it's not locked in a private repository, so you can explore this at your leisure and take a look at the code. And there, I use the issue tracker there as well to give an idea of what the issue is. In fact, I'll go ahead and drop a link over in our chat for the issue that we'll be looking at tonight. And I'm going to drop a note here for anybody that comes in the future. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. So here is our issue for tonight. It is related to a task that I need to do for College Conductor. And this will require a bit of context about this process. College Conductor pulls data from a variety of services. There are different application types in the US university system, and each school has their own applications that they're interested in. So what College Conductor tries to do is aggregate all those resources into a single place that a college admissions counselor or consultant can use to guide their students along the way. One of the things that I need to do, though, is to take my list of roughly 2,000 US universities and colleges and blend them with this information and make the connections between this is the list for this application of which schools accept it, and here's my full list of schools. And if I don't have those connections in place, the value of the data is not really there, because when someone who is a user of the service visits, let's say, University of Virginia, and we can do that real quick just to give you an idea of what a page looks like. When they visit this page, if UVA accepts multiple application types, it won't be possible to know that information unless I actually connect it in the backend. No, I've not actually seen Prisma.io. What is that? Take a quick look. Oh yes, yeah, I've come across this before somewhere. I haven't looked into the details of it, but this looks like an ORM, which is great. ORMs are really useful. So this project is using Django, and actually use Django's object relational mapper to do all of the interaction with the database. And because of the way that Django is designed and built, it's not really something where you can easily swap out their ORM, because it's sort of very coupled into the entire system. So I'm going to be sticking with the Django ORM tonight. That looks really cool. Thanks for the suggestion over there. So we've got our page here for University of Virginia, and we're going to connect that. So how am I going to connect this? I've been thinking about this task of, I've got some web scraping work that goes on and out to each of these services that I'm gathering data from, and it does the scrape and finds the schools, and that's some information I keep in one table. And so we make this concrete. Why don't we actually look at a bit of code while we're doing this? So let's open up Vim and let's look at the Trackers models. Trackers is the Django application that I'm using to actually do all of the scanning for these different services. Right now I'm starting with the Common App Tracker. Common App is one of the services that I need. That is one of the type of applications that's used in US universities. So if you know Django or can look at this model, I think hopefully you can understand it pretty well. A Django model maps to a database table, and each of the attributes that's listed is essentially a column in that database table. And so the task that I run in the background that runs on a Sunday morning and just scans for new information pulls out these two fields: a name, the name of the university, and a slug that maps into the Common App website, so that when I want to be able to link to that site later, this is kind of the unique identifier that gets me to a unique college page. So that's the information that I'm pulling out. And then I've got some statuses here that says that, you know, when something is created for the first time and pulled from this web scraper, it's put in this pending status. And all of these other statuses are meant for human interaction to say, what do we want to consider this school as done or not. So the final bit and the actual part that I need to do is this connection here to a school foreign key. So in my database model, I have my own interpretation of schools. This is a full list of schools that I've scraped from a bunch of sources over the years that are available, that, you know, list basically the biggest 2,000 universities and colleges in the US. And that's my canonical source. And so when I create this linkage between a Common App Tracker instance and the actual school, I'll be able to use that information on the other side of, you know, on the display side for the user, and show that, hey, this school uses a Common App. So what I'm trying to do in this process of automating, which is really what we're getting at tonight, is make this easier to take these Common App Tracker instances and populate them with the schools. If you've used Django, you know that Django has, or you probably know that Django has a built-in admin interface. And that gives you a very raw view of, here is the database table represented in a graphical format that is effectively an HTML table. And you can click through stuff and make connections appropriately there. But the process is extremely manual. So if I was going to do this on my own, I could work through the admin side by side and say, find a school that is a Common App school, and do a search for the rest of my schools and say, do I have any school that looks like this, that has a similar name? And I could connect that, click save, and go through this process. But there are roughly like 900 of these schools that are for the Common App. And doing that manually, even if it took a minute per school, which is very optimistic, would take many, many hours of my life. So what I'm trying to do with this admin tool that we're making is build a specialized page that will do that searching for me and present some viable options. So if I have a school like, I don't know, let's make up an example. Let's pick Rice University. If I have a school like Rice University, I want to be able to take the name that I found from Common App, and I'm going to split it up into two. I want to split it up into Rice, and I want to split it up into University. University is a useless piece of information because it's going to be present in just about every school that's in the system. The word university or college, it just doesn't matter. It's going to give me too many results. But the name Rice is a very unique kind of identifier. And so by splitting up the name into its kind of tokens and then doing a search for give me all the schools that contain something like Rice in the name, I can very quickly narrow down on if I have Rice University in my actual database. If I do, I want my admin tool to basically give me that school listing. I want to be able to click it, and then I want some code in the background to automatically make the association and save it and set the status appropriately as tracked so that I can move on to the next school. So ideally that will get me down to something like doing a school every 10 seconds or so. That would be awesome, because it would shortly simplify the amount of work, and it would just be a whole lot less tedious. It's a lot of clicking when you're working through the admin. It's very error prone, it's very manual, and so I think what I'm trying to do this, I've been thinking more about like, what is this that I'm doing? It's not fully automated, so I think I'm calling this a semi-automated task is really what I'm getting at. So if you were able to join in last week, we started, I was going down this path of making this tool, but I didn't have any place to put it. I didn't have any sort of admin dashboard. And so that is kind of the thing that we built last week, was a support view that is a very basic view that's going to display a dashboard. And why don't we, no, I don't want to update that right now. Why don't we take a quick peek at that to see what's there. It's not a lot. So I'm running the Honcho web server, or the Honcho tool to start my web server, and it gets all of the processes going to make the necessary web server start up. And then we can go over here and we can load up, what is it, localhost 8080 should be the place to go. So this is everything running locally on my system. So this is all fake data, and I'm already logged in as the super user or a staff user on this account. And what I did last week was I made a convenient shortcut that I could quickly jump into this, because I'm going to have the same issue when I actually deploy this to my production site. So I want to be able to jump straight to my tools. The other thing that we added was we wanted to say, like, I wanted to gamify this a little bit and show me how much work I still needed to do. And so that is what this gigantic paragraph, or excuse me, heading is at the top. It's kind of giving me a status indicator. But effectively, the place that what I want to start is by putting in a view that is going to be linked to right here. And that will be the entry point into this tool that then we can do this semi-automated work of doing lookups on common apps versus what's in my school database. So I think that's where we're at a place where I've given enough context of what the task is at the highest level. Again, if you have any questions, ask me in the chat. There's also, I've sort of detailed in the issue the main bullet points that I think we need to care about. And we'll work through those as a guide for the actual development. So we need to make an admin page, which will query the schools. Okay, so let's start with that. For the moment, I'm gonna kill the development server. I don't actually know if we'll need it again or not, but we probably will in a moment, but we'll just work with what we've got. So I need a place for this to live, and I think the most sensible place for a tool about tracking, about managing this tracking, is probably in that Trackers app. So I broke this down. I kind of belabored this terminology last week, but if you're not super familiar with Django, the Django lingo is project is the root. That is the thing that all of your code lives under, is a Django project. Within Django, they have what are referred to as applications, and those are kind of your major subsystems or components that live within your app. So if you're looking at a directory that contains, this is all of College Conductor's code here, and there's a lot of stuff here that is in support of deployment and front end and all this other stuff. But the Python code, by and large, lives in this conductor directory. The conductor directory is the Django project, and then accounts, core, planner, support, trackers. These are all the different apps that are in this. So the application structure is such that if And there's actually even a template command that Django has to make an application, and it populates a few standard files. So if you're ever browsing a Django project in the future, you can quickly recognize an application by, does it have a models.py file? Does it have a views.py? Is there an admin.py? These are very common elements that you'll see in many of them. So I want to come in here to, did I come into the right area? Yeah, trackers and views, and we don't have any views yet. So I like to use common patterns that I have in other areas. So let's bring up kind of a matching file that can give us some guidance so I don't forget all the imports and all of that. And then we're also going to need a test file just to kind of give me, we need to write some tests for this that we'll get into of why, because there's certain protection and that things that I want to make sure remain true and don't actually get exposed to regular users. So we've got the views file. The other file I want to do, actually before we open that one, let's come in here to the test area for this trackers, and we're going to make a test views file so that we can do some test-driven development. And I'm going to save it, and I'm going to also open the views file that was empty. So the top is the views, the bottom is the test views thing that we're going to need. And the thing that we want to start with is the test case. So over here, I'm going to go from conductor.tests. I have a default test case that we can use that I've hooked on some additional functionality for that will be helpful in the future. And so we need to do, we need to give this thing a name. So I give all test cases their a common name. So now the part that I want to put after that is the name of the view. And I haven't decided on the name of the view yet. So what is this thing doing? It's a tool for connecting common apps. So how about, for lack of a great name that's popping to mind, let's call it Connect Common Apps. And we'll make that our test case. And for the moment, I'm just going to say pass so that we don't get a syntax error. So last week, okay, let me revisit something that I did last week. Last week when we did this, we were looking for a way to, with a decorator, protect this tools dashboard, which was, as a reminder, this page over here. And I want to make sure that your regular everyday user or an unauthenticated user, someone who's just visiting the site, is never able to reach this page. Or if they do happen to figure out this URL, they get redirected to a login page, and even if they logged in, they wouldn't have permissions to view it. So what we did was, in the code, we found the right decorator to use in the auth contrib module, and we applied that decorator to make sure that this view would only react to a user with staff level permissions. And at the time I was saying I really thought that there existed a specific decorator that would do that automatically without having to do something specific, like something else. And that was really vague, so let me go over what I mean. So you can see here today, I have this staff required decorator. So after the stream finished, I was really bothered by this, and I went and found where I thought this was, and it turned out it was in a different company that I work for had made a view that did what I claimed there was publicly, but there wasn't. So let's explore my version of it. It wasn't the same code as the company. I actually took a different approach, but I sort of wrapped up the decorator that we explored last week. So if we look at where I put this, I put it into core decorators because I think it's going to be something that will apply to many applications. And we can open up the decorators file. And I don't know why you're telling me, maybe I restarted my computer or something. Okay, so here's the thing. The decorator that we brought in last time was this user passes test decorator. And that decorator takes a callable, which you can see up above, and the callable is given a user model record and is designed to return a bool. So when we were working on this special support page last time, I put this checkIsStaff function that's right here, right at the top of the views file. And then down here at the decorator, I said, and let's just hack this up for a second. I said user passes test check if staff. That was what was the code that appeared there before. But I didn't really like that because I felt like in order to make this view, you had to compose these two things together. And I knew that I was going to do that multiple times. And I felt like doing that kind of composition each time seemed sort of unnecessary. So what I did was I recreated my own version of this specific decorator that I saw from a company, and I shoved it in its own file that I put in core. And so if you know how decorators work, a decorator function is really exactly that. It's a function that the at syntax in Python is like at compile time's not really the right word. At the time where it generates the PYC and processes your Python file, it actually is doing the job of like wrapping this function and effectively doing what I'm showing up here in this core decorators file at line 10. So it's doing a little bit more than that. It's kind of like, yeah, the best word to describe it is wrapping. And so it's taking the original function, which would be tools dashboard, and putting another function on top of that as something that code that runs before you even get to this function. And you can take a decorator and you can basically call it with its normal parameters and essentially create a new decorator out of it. And it will behave the same kind of way. And so what I did was I did that composition that I was talking about. I took the user passes test and I took checkIsStaff, and I combined this into this new staff required decorator. And so now when I want to create something that requires staff level permission, which is what this Boolean is checking right here, all I need to do is say at staff required. I think it cleans it up. I think it expresses the meaning very well. And as we'll see, when we get into actually adding our trackers version of this thing, all we'll have to do is add one import of staff required rather than importing this Boolean function of checkIsStaff and something from the contrib module. Excuse me. So that was a bit of a side tangent. I think that was redundant. That was a bit of a tangent, but it explains why this code might look a little different if you are viewing this from last week. Okay, so now we're at our connect common apps test case. And so similar to this one, and I'm going to actually bring up the test views on this guy because we're going to have a lot of the same tests. I want to test these two things. In fact, I'm going to steal them because I think that makes sense. So I want to check that the permissions are the same level of permission, like you don't get in unless you have the staff required, and then you get an OK response if you do have the correct permission level. And so this is a pattern that I'm using, and I'm okay basically copy pasting some code and then changing the view. I think it's a totally legitimate test. Everything is sort of self-contained. I think it's a decent approach. So I said a moment ago that I'm going to call the view connect common apps. So that's the thing that we're going to change. And so we're going to change it in the two places. We don't have any views imported yet, so we need to import that. And this is tracker. So we're going to go from conductor trackers import views. Okay. And we also need reverse. Reverse is from Django URLs, which we can do like that. What else am I missing? Okay, so my tooling is telling me that the error message. So what I was going to do is run this test case and prove that we don't have the views yet, but my Vim editor and the plugins I have configured are smart enough to know that, hey, wait a minute, we've already looked in there and can tell you that you don't have the view yet. So let's come up to this file and let's create the view. So it's going to be connect common apps. It will take a request. I use type checking syntax, so that'll be an HTTP request, and it will return an HTTP response. And what else can we do? I'm gonna come back over to this other file and I'm going to steal the render call because we're going to need that later. And we'll say kind of fill in some of the details even though they're false. So we're missing a bunch of things, which is fine. We have some imports that we got to bring in. So we need to say, in fact, let's copy it. We need HTTP request and responses imports because the type checking syntax, if you've never used it, these are valid identifiers that the type checker is looking for. They're going to be what the type checker compares against later on, and it needs to know where it's coming from. So if you don't include that information, it doesn't know where to look. So that's why those are needed, and then render is just an undefined thing unless we bring it in as well. So now it's saying I need an annotation for context. Well, I don't really care that much of what the type annotation is for this because we may not even need it, but I'll put in something anyway. The context is going to be I'm just saying like it's a dict of any type. That's what's going on when you use lowercase dict for type checking syntax. Okay, that was a lot of stuff. But now if we come back to the test case, we should hopefully get an actual failure. Okay, perfect. So our view right now is it's just blindly rendering this template that is not even the right template that we want. It's getting context from something that's empty. But the key thing that I'm trying to test in these two tests, this test OK is a happy path test to make sure that it just renders something. So that test is passing, that's good. But the more important thing I want to do is make sure that this is a protected view, so that people will not be able to access it who shouldn't. So we can come up to, from conductor core decorators, we can import that new staff required decorator that I created after the end of the last session, and we can decorate our view with it. And now coming back down here, we can run the test case again, and great, both of them passed. So before we move on, let's add a documentation string, and then let's also add like a proper template. So our documentation string should say just something like a tool to connect common app trackers to schools. That's really what this is. And then the other thing we need to change is the actual template. And so this isn't going to be coming from support this time. This time it's going to be coming from trackers. And I'm actually going to give it, I guess, the same name, why not, as the view. That's a decent enough name. So there's a name for our template. Now let's try our test again. And as I expected, it failed because right now we're calling render, and render is doing all the Django code. And so it's looking for a template in the areas that we have declared are the directories to look for templates, and it's failing to find one, which makes sense because we haven't made it yet. So it's giving an appropriate failure, so we get a nice check that trackers is that this template doesn't exist yet. So I think we're done with this test case, and I think we can go to support tools dashboard. We'll go. What I'm gonna steal from this template, and we're going to go up a couple levels. There is not a templates trackers directory yet, so let's go ahead and create one. So that's going to create a trackers area, and then we can create this new template of connect common apps HTML, and then paste that code in there. And then I'm going to change the title to be connect common apps. Okay. And this bit doesn't matter, but we'll keep the rest of that template because that's when we made this dashboard, we tried out like a very minimal styling at first, and it looked awful. It was like the chunk that says 2 common app schools was like way over on the side, like hugging the edge. It just looked terrible. So we added enough of a bootstrap container to make it at least look decent, because you got to remember that these pages are not going to be viewed by any particular person, but they are going to be viewed by me. So I guess that wasn't totally true. They're not going to be viewed by other people, so they don't have to look as polished as like the actual UI that gets presented to a user of the service. But at the same time, I don't want to stare at something that's just totally junky. So we're going with this as our template, and it will work. So where are we now? Now it's time to do the work. Well, okay, actually, I lied. Before we get to that, let's do 2 more things. Let's do, because here's what's missing. We have a view right here, and the view is Django's way of saying, given a request that comes in, how do you make the response that gets sent back to the browser, the HTML output? But we haven't wired it up to anything. So we need to wire it up somewhere. And I think what I'm going to do is create, oh boy. So I know I need a urls.py file. So this is one thing that we're going to need. And the other thing that we're going to need is to go over to conductor URLs. So, oops, not that one. Conductor, where'd you go? Oh, config, sorry. So this URLs thing right here is the like master layout of everything that is routed to at College Conductor. So when you go to collegeconductor.com right now, and you go to the very root of the site, which is what this empty string syntax is, it's going to do, it's going to show you this index view, which is coming from, one of the places. It's a view that's somewhere in the system. I mentioned last week that I've made a lot of these paths so that they are explicitly defined at this level, because I didn't, know where I wanted to put things yet, and that Django has another pattern where you can include groups of views by doing an include. And so that is something that that I want to do tonight, because I'm going to have multiple of these tools views for different types of stuff. Right now I'm only doing Common App, but there's another one called Universal College Applications. There's a Coalition. It doesn't really matter, but there's a couple others, and they will have similar tools, and I want to put them all in the same place. So in order to do that, we need to make a file that we can include, and you can see the syntax here that I've done for the actual contrib auth module. So all of my authentication stuff is using the built-in auth module that has a bunch of like login views and logout and all of those kind of things that are needed, password reset, etc. And so you wire those together by using include along with the place where you want to root this stuff. So I'm saying that for what I'm about to do, I want to do, let's see, path, and I want it to be all of my trackers. So all of my tooling views are going to basically be under collegeconductor.com/trackers/ whatever I end up naming this thing. And so we're going to go like this and say include conductor dot trackers dot URLs. I think that's what we're going to do. Now, let's see what happens if we try and start Honcho. Let's see if it blows up or not. I can't remember if it will. Okay, there was an error, which means that it was missing something that I figured it was going to be missing. So if you read this message, it says the URL conf here at this module that that I saved it, but it was an empty file, does not appear to have any patterns in it. So yeah, we have to define some patterns. And so the way to do that, I think now let's check on this. I harp on this just about every time, but sometimes you just have to read the documentation. Django URL, I believe it's URL patterns is the term that they want us to use in Django 2, but I just want to confirm versus some other name. Oops, there was a urls.py example. Okay, yeah. So the thing that we're missing is that when Django is doing its importing stuff of URLs, it expects to see this particular variable of URL patterns, and it's a list of stuff. So I think that we could probably even get rid of that error message of this doesn't have anything in it by switching this to say URL patterns is an empty list, which black is now putting on my mind. That's fine. So is it going to be happy this time? Well, I couldn't see the error message, so we're going to just stop it and we'll start it up again and see if it's okay with an empty thing. Yeah, I don't think I saw any error. It's hard to catch because Webpack throws out a lot of information. But as the web thing started up, no big tracebacks occurred. So if we go over here, and I believe if this should give us a nice debug page saying you don't have anything there. Good. So Django has some really nice debugging features built into it. And this is only available when you have debug set to true. And if you try and turn on this for production and you have debug set to true, that's really bad. You can leak a lot of information, not only this kind of stuff, but all sorts of like, let me give you an example. You can get tons of information. You get access to settings. It's bad. So don't do debug equal true on production. There's soapbox message for the day, but it gives you the routes that Django knows about. And you can see, hopefully, I'm searching for trackers, and I think because I said that URL patterns was an empty list, Django just said, forget it, we're not even going to bother registering trackers itself because there's no views under it. So we need to make a view to put there. And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to import path. Don't need include over here, but we do need path. And we're going to do path, and the path I want. So at this level, it kind of makes a hierarchy. So you've got this config URLs thing, which is the root of the tree, which is why you can an empty string there will access the root of the website. But by doing this include thing here, it says that everything under this, all of the URLs that are here are actually set and stored under accounts. So if you go to my login page, let's see if we can do that. or I might have it in my history. So you can see there's an accounts login page. That's only because we put the auth module rooted at accounts. We could have put that anywhere. I could have named it anything, and it would have worked just as well. Although you might have confusing looks from your customers when you have them log in at whizbang.login or /login or something like that. So, but the point is that the path here does not now need to repeat the word trackers, because it's ignorant of what gets put above it. So here I want to use the name of I'm going to use like a more URL friendly name of connect common apps as the route. And Django likes to put slashes at the end of its URLs. I don't fully understand the reasoning behind that one. I'm sure somebody could school me on it. Maybe historically, or maybe there's just like legitimate reason to claim that a URL needs that. But that's kind of the convention. And actually, if you leave it off, what will happen is Django in its machinery, like if I just said connect common apps, this would work, but it would involve doing a redirect to the same location with including the slash. So it actually would do 2 network requests. So you don't want to do that. So just put in the slash at the end. I think you can technically turn off the slash. I don't know if it makes the rest of things funny or not. I'm not going to speculate on that. So we have a path, and we're going to need the views themselves. So let's import the entire views module. We'll say views.connect common apps. You need to provide, you don't invoke it here, you just provide the callable. So what I mean by that is you're not calling it with parentheses, you're just saying this is the actual thing that you care about. And the other thing we need is a name, and we'll call this, I'll just keep using the same kind of terminology. I think with my names, I've been using dashes as well. So we'll say connect common apps. And the reason I'm giving the names in Django are kind of a global namespace, which might be, which you might look at that and consider it to be bad. But what I'm going to do is use Django's namespacing feature, and this will make more sense a little bit later. So let's get up that, see if we can find an example of where those go. So Django documentation is great. You should use it all the time if you can, as a way to reference that. So I'm trying to remember where we have to write. I would give it namespace. Maybe it's just URL namespaces. So it looks like if you used app name, and I say app name is trackers. Now later on, when I want to refer to this URL and look it up, I can use trackers : connect common apps, and that way you don't have to keep track of like every global name being uniquely identified. Now on something as unique as connect common apps, I'm not really worried about like collisions between view names, but let's say you wanted to use, like you had an index page for the Django app you're building, and you have multiple Django apps, and each of them has an index. Index is the most convenient name to use, but if you didn't use namespaces, you would have to give it some kind of a global name. And the effect would be that like you provide global name index, and here you can like scope it. Maybe it's arguable about the benefit of that, like because it's totally possible to give everything a global name and say, I could say trackers connect common app. So it's really just about saving a bit of typing so that you don't have to provide that on each individual view. So your mileage will vary if you think that's valuable or not, but I'm going to try it here. And the place that I want to use it, so now that we have this thing defined, I can go back to the tools dashboard template, and we can say, put a paragraph tag that has an anchor that is an href, and I want to say URL of trackers connect common apps as the URL. Whoops, missed the, okay. And we'll give it a label of connect common apps. All right, now let's take a look at what that did to our tools page. Hopefully it did the right thing. Okay, perfect. So we have a hyperlink here, and take a look at the URL bar at the bottom. You'll see it says trackers/connect common apps. So in the template syntax, using this URLs thing and is a function that actually takes the unique identifier of the view and returns the string version of it. And the reason it's done that way is, let's say I decided it was a really terrible idea to put trackers at the top level of my site. And so over here in the config URLs, I wanted to change it from trackers to trackers super secret path. Okay, something like that. If I choose to do it here, now if I save that and go and then refresh this page, what we'll see in a second is that the trackers, the URL that was made is still correct, trackers super secret path. So what this is saving me from, I'm actually going to set that back, is hard coding paths. So if I had come in here and ignored the URL function and just said trackers connect, you know, blah, 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 whatever that was, and hard coded it in, that means that if I were to ever change the place where I wanted this stuff, that the URL would suddenly be broken, which would be really annoying. And it's really annoying in one place. It's super annoying when it shows up in a lot of your templates. So this is the way that Django provides as to get around this hard coding of URLs and give you the flexibility of putting things and moving things where you want to. It's a pretty cool feature. So now we have our view. Our view is connected to a URL that is accessible at a path that I care about, and then it's available from on our dashboard and is ready to go. Oh, except it's not. Why did you do that? Oh, that's because I changed it back. Look at that. So I hadn't refreshed the page, and I moved it back. There's a perfect example of what would have happened if you had hard-coded it. So this doesn't say anything right now except the title up here of Connect Common Apps. So now it's time to get to the work, right? We're done configuring where it's connected. We are done with that dashboard page right now. And I think we can safely go back to the views and start putting it in. Okay, so I'm trying to think of like, what is the right, what's the right workflow for this? I think I want the workflow to be find a common app tracker instance that is in the pending state. I really don't care which one it is, because ultimately I need to process all of them. And so give me a pending one and put it in the page, render it. Also, along with that, that's where I want to pull the name apart, throw out common words, and also do the query on the school to give me a list of schools that might match. So let's start with the context that we care about. So the first bit I'm going to say is test the context. And let's just get the boilerplate around that. We're going to need a lot of the same stuff. Sorry, 1 second. Minor detour. So to test the context, we're going to want to test using the mock of it. So I'm going to bring in this version that already has that stuff configured. Sorry if that was confusing. So we want to mock out the view. I don't actually want it to run through the Django rendering. And the way to do that is using mock patch, which essentially replaces render with a magic mock. A magic mock is a mock object that will pretend to be whatever you call it as. So if you call it render, you can tell it to return a bunch of stuff, and it will happily do that and move on its merry way. And then what you can do after that is pull out variables out of whatever you called it with. So like your code is going to run and it gives it this information, and Magic Mock is going to retain all the information and store it in certain places in its structure and return a fake response. And this is great for avoiding like network calls out to an API or something like that. It skips all that stuff, and so it's super fast. And then in your test, you can then take that mock that you passed into the calling code and pull that information out and check, did my logic get put in there appropriately? So the way that this test is set up is, well, we got to do a couple things first. Sorry. We need to, from unit test, import mock. That's one thing. And from conductor trackers models, import common app tracker. And change this to connect common apps. Okay, everything's happy now. What was I saying? Oh, yes. So when you replace this render function, you pull out this information, and then you can analyze it to check your logic. So when I get context here in this variable in my test, it's going to be the same context that gets passed in as the third argument to the render, because that's what this is saying. It's like, take the first call to that mock object, which is why it's at index 0, and then, oh, I'm sorry, that's not right. Take the first list argument, and then in that list of arguments, take the third one, which is maps to context. So what we want to exist in the context is a common app tracker that is in the pending state. So let's store that in our test. I'm going to create a second one to make sure that we're pulling the right one and not the not something inappropriate. And then down here, I follow expected and then actual. So the expected thing is to get the actual, excuse me, I'm mixing up words. The expected value is the common app tracker that we created above, and then we're going at the key of common app tracker. And this right now should fail with a key error because this dictionary that we're populating up here doesn't have anything in it. Okay, as expected. it's a test failure, which is good. That's progress, right? And just a sanity check. Let's see how we're doing on the actual issue. So we've made an admin page. That took quite a bit of work to wire all that up. That will query the schools based off of components in the Common App school name. Okay, so we have step one is to get the Common App school name. So we're going to say Common App Tracker. Now we want to query using the model and the model's manager. That's what this objects thing is. And we're going to use filter, which is effectively SQL where clause. And we want to say something that has its status in Common App Tracker pending. That's the status we care about. And I want the first one of those. Like I said, I don't really care. So if you just left it at filter, let's pretend that wasn't there, that will give you back a query set, which is as the name implies, a set of objects, potentially a set of just one. And when you're adding something like first, there's also last, there's latest, there's a bunch of these query set methods. But we want a specific instance, but I don't care which one. We can use first to say that. This will give us a Common App Tracker. And now we can take that and put it in the dictionary at that key. Whoops, they don't have the model. From conductor trackers models import Common App Tracker. Okay, now our test should pass. Great. Okay, so that's step one. Step two is to get what? We need to get the schools in there, right? Yeah, I think that was the other part of it. Yeah, we have to query the schools. So we want any schools that match Common App Tracker in any way. And when I think about how I'm doing this query, it's not the most elegant way. I'll fully admit to that. But the tool doesn't need to be super elegant. So I can maybe make this unique at the end. I don't know that we care. Or maybe I'll make a set, who knows? Because I'm gonna do this query a few times. I'm not gonna limit it because this is again this is an admin tool that's used by me, and if it's not something I'm using frequently, so if I get back a lot of results from schools, I don't really care. There's a lot of constraints that you might normally consider on something that is for your users that might get a lot of traffic that you might want to think through. Like, the query that I'm about to run, if it returned 100 schools, that would be a really terrible user experience because it's probably too much data to consider. But if, on the other hand, it's just me, I might not need to look through 100 schools to find the right one. I'm throwing out everything like considerations about pagination, anything else like that. It's not important for this. But we do want schools. So how are we going to build that out? I think, well, what's something we could do? I'm trying to think if I want to put this in this test context test, or if I want to make a separate test for this, because there is logic behind this, and that's where my brain is going. I need to talk out loud so you're not just watching me think, because it's just riveting streaming, right? So thinking out loud, I need a test that does that logic I described earlier, tokenizing, splitting up the name, of the Common App school and finding a school. So I think it doesn't make sense to use it in just saying like a generic test of context like we have here. I think what I want to do is make a specific test that says something like test find school, find matching school. Yeah, that seems pretty good. So let's oops, sorry, I can do Vim, I promise. Let's take all that stuff, let's put it at the end, because we're going to need to mock this out anyway, because it's still going to be looking at the context, but we're doing it as from a very specific point of view. So I don't want to just say, what's the context have? Context is really just an intermediate step to getting the data that we care about. So when we set this up, it's actually going to be a lot of the same setup. So it's going to look very like, why are you copy pasting all this stuff? The point is I'm trying to tell a story with the test. The story will be more evident when I set up the data. And this time I'm not even testing that there are multiple, so I don't care about that. I know that part's already working. So I'm saying from a pending school, if I put in a name, let's pick a name. I'm going to use, I went to the University of Virginia, so let's use that as our example. And we're going to say name equal name. So that's one. And I'm going to pick let's create 2 school records. We only care about keeping track of one of them though. And so I want to say school, and we're going to use our, the test case has access to something which is a school factory, which is using the factory boy package. This is really cool for making model data. And it's going to have the same name as above. So this is the school that we want to find. That's why I'm assigning it a value, because I'm going to use it in the assertions on the other side. I want to make another school that will not show up in the results. So we'll do, this time we'll do a name of Johns Hopkins University, which is my other alma mater. So the test is complaining that we have a bunch of unused variables. No big surprise. And this time I don't even really care about the tracker instance, because what I want to find is that the thing at the other side, we're going to assert that school is what is in context schools. That's what I'm going to store it in, and I expect it to only have a length of 1, so there's probably another good assertion, worthwhile assertion. Assert equal 1 length of context of schools. Okay. So now I'm using all my variables, so Vim stops complaining at me, and I'm doing an appropriate test. Let's check it out. As I would expect, I don't have any schools put into the context yet, so it of course can't even assert that. So let's do, just to get a broken test, let's just do this. Let's say schools equal school.objects.all. And we need to pull in the school model, which is coming from a different app, which I have. It's in the planner app. Because remember, College Conductor is about building schedules, and schools are an intricate part of the schedule. It's sort of a core app of the system. That's why it lives over there. The piece that I'm missing, the reason why it's complaining, is because I did not actually connect it. I got to put it in the context as well. Okay. Now, I still expect this test to pass because we created 2 schools in the test, so it's going to say 2 does not equal 1, or it should, or 1 does not equal 2, I guess. So that's still correct. So now's the time for the real work. We've got a test that, like, if we can get this test to pass, then I think it has proved out the flow, the logic that I want for this. And I chose these test variables for a specific reason, like specifically including university, because what I want to do is tokenize, like I said. So let's take the school's name, which is coming from what I scraped off the web. So we'll call it school name parts, and it's the common app tracker name attribute. It's a string, okay, and we're going to split it. And by splitting it, we should have University of Virginia. And what I want to do is what? I want to do a query on each of those parts. And we're going to add any schools that come back from each of those parts to one set, I think, ultimately is what we're going to use. Do I care if it's a set or a list? No, I don't. So let's use a list just because it'll be easier. So for school name part in school name parts, for a moment, let's just prove that this is doing what I think it's doing. I learned a hard lesson in college. You know, college is actually good for something sometimes. Let me pause. So University of Virginia, they're all printing out, so that's good. When I did college a long time ago now, back in 2002, that's when I started, I was doing C++ code. And unit testing was not as nearly as common as it is today, and certainly wasn't popular for C++. And my professors were not pushing testing on us on any sort of level at all. And I remember doing a lot of projects where I would write code for a really long time, like 30 minutes, an hour. And I would write it, and I'm also a very novice programmer at the time, so keep all this information in mind. And I would try and run the compiler, and the compiler, not only were compilers not as good back then, the compiler would just spit out like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of error messages. This was in a very old version of Visual Studio, because UVA did a lot of Microsoft stuff at the time. I don't know that they still do, but they did when I was there. And I don't know why it took me so long to learn the lesson, but eventually I learned you need to work in very small increments, because if you don't work in small increments, then if you make a lot of changes, you don't know which change could be causing a problem. So hopefully, if you've been watching me doing the stream, or if you've been watching me stream for a while, you've seen that I try and make little steps where I do just enough that I can verify something along the way. And it might seem slow, it might seem tedious, but what I found is it works towards the end goal rather rapidly. I think there even might be a Marine phrase or something to the effect of slow means smooth and smooth means fast. I'm totally butchering that. I'm sorry if you're a Marine. I apologize. And I don't even know if it's Marines is the right attribution. So if it wasn't Marines and it's some other force of the military, I also apologize for butchering which part it came from. But the general idea is like slow and steady, I guess. So we have the school name parts, we know that we have each part, and what I care about, so like let's get rid of this schools query for all of them. Like that's unrealistic. I don't really want to query all the schools. That's silly. So the thing we want to put above is an empty list of schools. And I want to do something like this. I want to say schools. We're going to do, if you know about Python lists, there's actually two ways to add new elements to the list. There's append and there's extend. And append is adding an individual element to a list. And extend is taking one list and taking another list and kind of like joining the elements from that other list onto the first list. So what we're going to do is extend this list of schools, and we're going to extend it with a query. And for the moment, just to give you an idea of what I mean by that, I'm going to write it out this way. So if I run this test, it's still going to fail. It's still going to say, whoops, it's going to fail for a different reason. I forgot the S on objects. I do that often. It's going to say 1 is not equal to 2. It's going to say 1 is not equal to 6. Okay. My factory must be making more schools than I anticipate. So that's all of the schools that are existing in the test at the moment that it exists. But notice what happened is it took every one of the queries, it took a query set, and query sets are naturally lazy, and they are not it doesn't actually issue the query to the database until you try and do something which is like a concrete action with it. So wrapping it in a list is telling Django, no, I need like the actual data right now because I want to put it in a Python list. So it forces evaluation of the query and returns a list of model records that then get extended onto the schools list. And this is getting a little crowded, so let's it's not going to hurt if we breathe, give it some breathing room. So what we really need here is the actual filter now. So we're going to say filter, and what is the right filter? That's the question. So I want to use the school name part to search within the name. If you know SQL, I want to do a like query that is like a case insensitive like. So I don't remember the right way to translate that in the ORM. So let's go look. Django query set, and we'll find it somewhere in the documentation. And I'm looking for like iname or in is not what I need, but I'm just hoping to find the area. There it is. I contains. So that's exactly what we want. So we're going to say, over in our code, we're going to say name, which is a part of the name that I have on the actual school record in conductor. And we want to say I contains, I contains school name part. So we're going to go through a loop, and we're going to take each piece of the school name, and we're going to say, can you find this word in all of the schools? Can you find this word in all of the schools? Can you find this word in all the schools? We're still not done, because right now this is going to do 3 queries, and 2 out of those 3 queries are really not going to be helpful. One is university. Like I've mentioned a few times before, this is just not useful. The second one is the article of, or is it article? That's not the right part of speech. Whatever, the word of is an extra word that is also not going to be of enough information to make a useful query. So even after doing this search, I expect that it's not going to be one result. it's actually going to be 4 results. And this is probably going to vary depending on how many times we run it. It may, is that true? Well, maybe it's holding steady. So the reason that it's 4 or not 1, at least one reason, is we explicitly created a school that has university of right there. And so that's one reason. I'm actually curious, what are all these schools? These are more schools than I anticipated. And it's enough that it's starting to bother me. So let's take a look. For school in school objects, all print school name. So we'd expect 2 of those for sure, but what are those other ones? I'm curious. It's only finding 2. So what's going on here? Let's print schools. Why? Maybe it's doing multiple instances. Okay. How are you doing that? I get university. So if 2 of the queries, if one query has I contains the word university, I would get how it finds University of Virginia and Johns Hopkins. Oh, of course. So I'm searching for the word of. Of course, it's going to find one matching school that has of, because that's the name that we added. And then searching for Virginia, and it's going to find it again. Okay, I feel better about this now. This is another thing I like about testing. It's like sometimes you don't even understand your own data until you properly look at it in detail. So it is only creating 2 school records, but you can see there's a lot of stuff that we don't care about. So how do we get it down to what we do care about? Okay, I'm going to have a tuple at the top. It'll be words to ignore. Well, that's just offensive. I don't know how to ban people, so today, that's gross. Sorry, folks. I will learn how to ban and remove messages on the next stream so that I can get rid of spammers like that. That's ridiculous. I'm very clear, whoever you are, that kind of behavior is not tolerated. Okay, so getting back to what the stream is about, I want to have a word like university and the word college and articles like of or the or a. And I'm going to keep this list kind of short right now because we don't need to go too in depth, and I'm sure that the data will show me other examples in the future. So we're going to come in here, and now we're going to say the test that we're going to do is if school name part lower, so I want to go ahead and lowercase it, and then compare it to all those words to ignore, those super common words. Or, you know, words to ignore is too specific of what it's trying to do. Let's call it common words is probably better. And If it's in that list, we're going to say continue. And what we'll do is skip that iteration of the loop, and I hope. And if we run the test again, hooray. So now I'm clearly still printing the school. I need to clean that up. But what happened was it filtered out the university word and the of word, and gave us the result that we care about. So that's great. That's exactly what we should show. So the next bit to do, let's see, what is the next bit to do? That was kind of the automation step that's really going to be the most useful. And I think I'm wondering if it's like a reasonable point to stop for the evening, because we have done quite a bit. We've created a new view, and maybe next time, all right, yeah, let's call that a day. So let's recap. What did we do? We created a new view. We learned about Django's URL routing and how to connect it in, how to connect views into a larger system. You can either use Path and connect individual views in, or you can create a specific file that contains URL patterns that can be hooked into an entire section, as we did with trackers. I talked a bit about using URL names and how to reference things in your template files so that they can be done without having to hard code paths in there. So that's a useful strategy to know when you're making templates, to actually use the URL thing over and over again, rather than something hard coded, so that if you ever decide to change, it's not going to break. Then we got into the guts of the view, and we talked about the strategy for how this is going to actually be helpful, of doing these queries and pulling together a list of schools. And we showed the tests, we looked at the tests that we need to actually prove out that this will be the behavior that we care about. And we made sure that the view had the proper permissions and connections so that not anybody on the internet can access it. I think what I'll do next time is take this data that we now have in this view, connect it into the template, and display both the Common App school that we're trying to connect and the list of schools that was found. And I'm either going to make some links out of those, and that will do a certain kind of request, or I will figure out how to do a post on those to make forms out of them, so that the back half of this is that I'm using this as a visual aid to say, like, if I found it, going way back to our example of Rice University, if I had Rice University and then found Rice University listed in my list of schools, I want to be able to click it, and then when it gets clicked in the background, on the second half of this processing, it would take the Common App tracker and take the actual school and look up both of them and take the foreign key, the foreign key of that school name, and store it in the Common App tracker so that relationship is established, and then also change the status from pending, which is like it needs to be handled, to tracked. And I think by doing that, I will finish off the tool, this semi-automated tool, and really complete the task so that I can go actually do this for real on my production data and get this part done. So that brings us to the end tonight. I think next week, on the 30th, we will come back and finish this off. So I do put up YouTube recordings of this. If you missed any part of this today and you want to come back, you're welcome to do that. I try to stream each week. If you found this useful, please subscribe on Twitch so that you know when I'm streaming again, although I am pretty regularly at Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. You can also follow me on Twitter, where I am MB Lehman. If you have questions and want to chat, I'm happy to take your questions and help you out in the best way I can. Hope you found this useful tonight, and I will see you next time. Take care.